Hello friends, this is Grief speaking. Today we're looking at 10 sad and tragic manga. Of course this is Grief, so all of these picks are also in the horror genre, or at least highly disturbing. Just remember, it's all subjective, but this is my personal list. Most of these I found while doing the disturbing Manga Iceberg, and they really stood out as being particularly sad, tragic, and heart-wrenching. I'd love to hear your recommendations for sad and disturbing manga below, but let's not waste any more time and just get to the video. Here's my list for 10 sad and disturbing manga. Hell Baby. I want to start this list with one of my favorite recent horror manga finds, the Hideshi Hino classic Hell Baby. Hell Baby starts with a woman giving birth to a set of twin girls. One is an ordinary, beautiful baby, while the other is horribly disfigured, and worse than that, she seems to have a taste for blood. After the father comes to this realization, he asks the doctor to keep quiet about the whole ordeal and to make up a story about losing one of the children during birth. In reality, they put the deformed baby in a garbage bag and throw her in a dump where she eventually dies. However, her corpse is struck by lightning, bringing her back to life, Frankenstein style. From there, she spends years in the junkyard, killing and eating nearby animals to survive. Eventually, a mysterious voice begins to speak to her and tells her to venture into the city and find her twin sister. I don't want to spoil what happens when she does find her, but I'll say this, as disturbing as this manga is, it actually really tugs on your heartstrings. I was not expecting it to be so emotionally effective. The Bully. Junji Ito's stories are always filled with tragedy, from Remina to Uzumaki, but I wanted to go with a lesser known story that I found to be particularly sad. It starts off with a woman named Kuriko speaking to her fiance about her childhood. She says there's something he must know about her before they get married. When Kuriko was a girl, she used to always play at the local playground. One day a mother drops off her young son, Now, and asks Kuriko if she would watch him. So the two kids played together and Now became quickly attached to Kuriko and returned to the park every day to play with her. His mother gave Kuriko a box of sweets as a thank you for being kind to the boy since he didn't have any friends. Kuriko felt obligated to play with Now, who was very attached and needy. Soon she grew resentful of the boy and began to bully him. It's really hard to read at this point because she basically just tortures this poor kid. She tells him there's bugs in his ears that'll eat his brains and makes him drink dirty water from a drain. Despite her bullying, Now continues to show up to play, hoping she'd go back to the sweet girl he knew. Well, it starts to get borderline homicidal as Kuriko tries to convince Now to jump off the highest point at the playground. His mom shows up before he jumps and Kuriko quickly covers up the incident, acting like Now had just lost his mind. Next time she sees him, she threatens him, telling him he'd better not tell his mom about any of this. Even though Now says he won't tell, Kuriko tells him he must be tested to be trusted. She then throws a ball in the doghouse of a vicious dog and demands that he get the ball, saying that if he's telling the truth, the dog won't hurt him. We don't see exactly what happened, but it appears that Now was attacked by the dog, and Kuriko concludes her story by saying that Now then moved away after that. However, she tells her fiance that she recently ran into Now as an adult. At this point, you might expect Now to be disfigured from the dog attack, but no, he's actually quite handsome, and more than that, he seems to forgive Kuriko for all the horror she inflicted on him. Kuriko then informs her fiance that the wedding is off and that she's in love with Now. This isn't the end of the story, however. After the two get married and have a child together, Now suddenly leaves one day, never to return. Kuriko is left to raise their son alone. In a moment of resentment toward her needy son, who's the spitting image of a young Now, she suddenly realizes that this was all a plan. Now married her and even had a child with her, all just to abandon her in an act of revenge. At this moment, Kuriko snaps. She dresses up in her old clothes and puts her hair into pigtails, then tells her son that they're going to the park, presumably to bully him the same way she did to Now. It's definitely one of the saddest Junji Ito tales I've read. Next on the list is Shamo. Shamo follows the life of a teenage killer, Ryo Narashima. Ryo killed his parents at 16 years old, although he claims he doesn't remember doing it, and his life thereafter is full of pain and violence. The story is told in 4 parts, each with its own story arc. It starts with Ryo going to a reformatory, a sort of prison for underage criminals. The very first night he's there, he's thrown in a room with a group of other criminals who attack and forcibly violate him. The next night, the leader of the pack is expecting more of the same treatment, but Ryo bites off his dork. It's disgusting, it's vile, but man, it's great to see him fight back a bit. Eventually, a criminal who assassinated the prime minister decades earlier is transferred to the reformatory to teach the boys karate. He sees some exceptional and natural ability in Ryo and helps him become even better than him. Well, 2 years later, Ryo is released due to laws protecting minors from long-term imprisonment. From here, Ryo takes up martial arts and begins fighting professionally, although he's definitely not on the up and up, as he's brutally violent against his opponents and is forced to work as a male gigolo to make extra cash. This continues into a life of sex, drugs, and violence. I won't go over the whole thing, but you get the idea. It kind of reminds me of Ichi the Killer, but even more tragic. Nijigahara Holograph. Translating to Rainbow Field Holograph, this story is centered around a girl named Ari and the horrible events surrounding her. Ari is a 5th grade student who's obsessed with an old fairy tale which she tells her classmates. The story is about a girl who's sent by God to warn a village of a monster that will consume them. 7 of the villagers decide to sacrifice the girl in order to appease the god. Well, this fairy tale is a not so subtle parallel of the events of the manga. Ari tells her classmates that the monster is real and lives in a drain tunnel, a story she's often bullied over. One day things go too far when 7 kids push Ari down a well, which leaves her in a coma for the majority of the manga. We then see the kids as adults and watch them deal with the guilt over the incident which has ruined their lives. There's a lot of tragedy here and pretty disturbing situations, like one of the bullies eventually becoming a mother who beats her children. This is all on top of the fact that Ari's father abused her throughout her childhood, and he's not the only one either. Ari does not have it good at all, and that's the most disturbing part of the whole thing. Brad Hurley's Coach. This is one of those manga that doesn't have much info about it out there, so I just had to read it cold and had no idea where it was going. Well, it went in a horrific direction. Basically, there's this rich noble family, the Bradhurleys, and the patriarch, Nicola Bradhurley, has a famous opera group. Every year he takes a single young woman from various orphanages and adopts them into his troupe, or so that's the public story anyway. The girls get picked up by a coach that they believe is taking them to a new life of wealth and prosperity, but instead they're taken to prisons where they're thrown into a cell with dozens of criminals who have their way with them in turn. Yeah, I didn't know what to expect, but it sure as hell wasn't that. Well, it seems that the Brad Hurley family has instituted this secret experimental program to appease prisoners and avoid revolts. Once a year, they supply the prisoners who are in for life with a young teen girl in what they call the Pascal Festival. Like I said, it's hard to read at times, but it's intriguing as you unravel more about the Brad Hurleys and why they began the program to begin with. Near the beginning, we follow one of the girls as she goes from being excited to join the troupe to being used in the Pascal Festival. She tries desperately to survive, but only lasts a few days before her body finally gives out. I'm telling you, this is not for the faint of heart and is brutal and tragic through and through. There's actually a really twisted and heartbreaking moment in this manga that was what made me add it to the list. At one point, one of the prisoners who's excited for the new girl to show up realizes that she's actually his daughter. He tries desperately to escape with the girl only to be shot down. Yeah, it might be one of the most disturbing on this list. 17 Sai. So 17 Sai is sort of notorious as it's a manga based on the real-life case of Junko Furuta, which may be familiar to some of you, but here's a brief summary. Junko was a beloved high school student who was kidnapped by a group of teen boys and subsequently tortured and eventually killed. In the realm of true crime, this is a particularly rough case, so it's become somewhat popular to cover, and along with its popularity has come some questionable media inspired by it, which leads us to 17 Sai. In some areas, it's directly taking from the Junko case, but in other ways, it's very different. Like, a large part of this manga is the fact that the kidnapped girl has a twin sister that's desperately trying to find her, whereas Junko had no twin. Where it takes from the real life story is the way the girl is treated. She's confined to a room where she's taken advantage of by multiple men, beaten, and starved. Watching this girl slowly be mentally broken is really sad, especially as it relates so closely to real life events. I will say that this particular manga is often confused with Shingendai Ryukaiden, which directly mirrors the Junko case. While 17 Sai has an actual story to it and even has a happy ending where the girl is saved by her twin sister, the other story is basically just an Eroguro fetish manga and is pretty disgusting. Flowers of Evil. This is for the most part a straightforward drama. It does have its share of really dark moments and the relationships themselves are very disturbing. It starts with a teenager, Kasuga, stealing his crush, Saiki's gym clothes out of some kind of pervy desperation. Well, another girl in his class, Nakamura, finds out what he did and begins to blackmail him into a strange relationship. At the same time, Kasuga manages to start dating Saiki, causing a rift between him and Nakamura, who is a straight up psychopath. Eventually, he breaks up with Saiki and decides he has stronger feelings for Nakamura. In order to impress her, he steals the panties from all the girls of his class for her. Together, they come up with some weird antisocial and rebellious plans to pin up all the panties on a post at the town's upcoming summer festival. Saiki, distraught over the breakup, attempts to seduce Kasuga, and when he rejects her, she straight up tries to force herself on him. Yeah, I didn't expect that. Eventually, the summer festival comes comes and the young couple climb on top of a float and attempt to light themselves on fire. It just continues from there and becomes more twisted as it goes. If you want a psychologically disturbing and tragic manga, Flowers of Evil might be for you. No Longer Human. No Longer Human, sometimes translated as A Shameful Life, is actually a 1948 Japanese novel by Osamu Dazai, but was later adapted by horror legend Junji Ito into this manga. It follows Oba Yozo, a troubled boy that doesn't relate to other people and in fact finds humans disgusting. He's molested by both a male and female servant, something he tells no one as he assumes it won't matter. He develops a habit of telling jokes and putting on a facade as a class clown in order to get by socially. For some reason he looks kind of like a manga version of Bobby Hill, but that's beside the point. Well, this works pretty well until an unfortunate looking and slow classmate, Takeichi, sees through his facade. This terrifies Oba and he decides to befriend Takeichi as a defense. He tells Takeichi that Setchan, who I think is Oba's cousin, has a crush on Takeichi. He develops strong feelings for her and confesses his love only for Setchan to reject him and tell him she's disgusted by him. This leads to Takeichi ending his own life. Oba, instead of feeling guilt or grief, instead feels relief as he doesn't have to deal with Takeichi anymore. Damn, that is one cold-hearted clown. Well, as Oba ages, he finds that he gets a lot of attention from women. So his two cousins, I think they're his cousins, I'm not 100% on that, begin fighting for his affection. First he makes love to Setchan and then Anissa without the other knowing. That is until Setchan walks in on him banging Anissa. Shortly after this, Anissa announces she's pregnant and Setchan freaks the hell out and stabs her to death. Then she announces she's actually pregnant, and when she finally delivers the baby, it looks like Takeichi, who's been dead for a year. And this is all just in Oba's childhood. The series follows him into adulthood and things get even darker from there. It is a true tragedy, and the coming of age theme drenched in dread reminds me a lot of our next entry on the list, Goodnight Poon-Poon. Oyasumi Poon-Poon, or Goodnight Poon-Poon, is considered one of the saddest mangas ever made. It follows a young boy, Poon-Poon's life from elementary school up into his early 20s as he constantly battles depression. The story is told in an interesting way as Poon-Poon and his family are drawn as simplistic birds while everyone else is drawn realistically. It's also narrated like a storybook as we get insight into Poon-Poon's feelings. Poon-Poon's parents are bad people, with his dad beating his mother so badly she ends up in the hospital, and his mother openly admitting she hates kids and doesn't care at all for Poon-Poon. Meanwhile, Poon-Poon falls in love with the transfer student, Aiko, who straight up says she wants his full devotion or she'll kill him. Their relationship, or lack of one, is at the focal point of the story. I mentioned that Poon-Poon's parents are terrible, but honestly, all the adults in this manga are kind of scary. They're drawn in a creepy style and often do or say really bizarre things. Anyway, Poon-Poon's life just becomes more and more distressing as horrible things happen to him and around him, and as he ages, he becomes pretty messed up. One of the sad parts of the story is that you see this innocent, shy kid slowly turn into an abuser himself as an adult. It's honestly considered one of the most bleak mangas of its kind, and I've seen many people suggest not reading it if you deal with depression, because things never really get better and it can leave you feeling hopeless depending on whether or not you connect with the character. Metamorphosis. This is one of the most disturbing mangas I have ever covered and is certainly the most tragic. Metamorphosis almost feels like if you mixed a hentai comic with an anti-drug PSA. I've covered this story before and the video got age restricted just because of how effed up this story is, so I'm going to be kind of careful about how I describe things here. The story follows a high school girl, Saki, who decides she wants to improve her social life by getting a makeover. Of course, she immediately begins getting attention from guys, one of which takes her to a private booth in a karaoke bar where he gives her ecstasy and takes advantage of her. She starts to date the guy and gets addicted to drugs. Pretty sad, right? Well, this is just the tip of the iceberg. Somehow or another, she begins sugar dating, basically being paid to date. As you might expect, this goes from compensated dating to prostitution really quick, as one old man offers her money for more than just a date. Well, apparently some of Saki's male classmates got photos of Saki with the old man and blackmail her for certain favors, let's say. Horrible, right? Tragic, right? Well, we're just getting started here. Saki's father gets laid off from his job, gets drunk, and proceeds to get real handsy with his own daughter. Of course, when Saki tells her mother about this, she doesn't believe her and actually starts to beat her. So Saki runs away from home, drops out of high school, and moves in with her original boyfriend, the guy that got her hooked on drugs. Unfortunately, he's racked up some debt at a heroin bar, and Saki helps pay the debt off by selling herself to its patrons. She then gets pregnant, and the boyfriend forces her not to keep it. She meets back up with the old guy from the beginning and does increasingly degrading acts in order to get money from him. She's then assaulted by the bar owner as well as all the patrons, who inject her with heroin to make her more compliant. So now she's addicted to heroin too. She then discovers that she's pregnant again and the boyfriend kicks her out. So now she's homeless and pregnant. She vows to quit the drugs and raise the baby, so she raises money by doing more favors. Well, she saves up quite a bit of money, which she keeps stashed in a locker, but some of her old classmates find it and then take advantage of her before beating her and stealing the money. Saki then stumbles into a public restroom where she decides life is not worth living. And that's the end of the manga. It's definitely one of the most messed up things I've probably ever covered on the channel, and I don't know why anyone would even write this. I don't even know why I read it. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this list. I'm excited to hear your recommendations in the comments. I do want to cover a couple of honorable mentions as well. Shoujo Tsubaki and Ichi the Killer were two that I thought about throwing on. They're both very tragic, but I just feel like I've covered both of them so many times recently. I figured it would be better to leave them off and include some other manga. Also, I know a highly recommended manga is Made in Abyss, which is supposed to be really sad and is actually considered one of the best manga in the last decade. The thing is, it's a really in-depth world and story, and frankly, I just haven't had time to read it. I also know that it's somewhat controversial because of some pretty questionable situations involving kids. I've heard people say that the author implements his own fetishes into it. I'm not really sure how accurate that is, but I want to read it for myself and see before I just throw it on a list willy-nilly. I'm sure there are plenty of other manga that could have or should have been on the list, so let me know what I'm missing. Shout out to my patrons Naomi Romero, Soma, Krusty the Crab, One Group, Laz Wishgender, Hunter Piva, Heather M, Creepypasta Cube, A Slightly Bigger Ant, Ricky Shadow, Strong Kohi, Matt Rozak, Steamboat Millie, The Beast Llama, Holy Ears, Nat 007, Andrew Valencia, Ursa, and Michelle Bracy. You guys are awesome. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. If you want a shout out like that at the end of every video, as well as bonus content, consider becoming a patron. The link is below. But I appreciate you guys watching at all, so thank you. This is Grief speaking. Goodbye, friends.